Welcome to our first episode of The Directors, a monthly program where directors of cancer centers tell us what keeps them up at night. Each episode is a conversation with two directors, followed by commentary by two discussants. We begin The Directors with a conversation with Robert Winn of Virginia Commonwealth University, Massey, and John Carpten of City of Hope. Winn is a pulmonologist as well as an expert in public health. At VCU, he serves as the director and Lipman Chair in Oncology. He is also the guest editor of the Cancer Letter during Black History Month. Carpten is an expert in genetics and genomics who serves as the Chief Scientific Officer of City of Hope and Director of the Beckman Research Institute. He holds the Arella Manella Cancer Center Director's Distinguished Chair at City of Hope and the Morgan and Helen Chu Director's Chair of the Beckman Research Institute. The discussants on this first episode of The Directors are Norman A. Sharpless, former director of NCI and former acting FDA commissioner, who is now a professor of cancer policy and innovation at UNC Chapel Hill, and Beverly Ginsberg Cooper, managing director for research at Huron Consulting Group. As a consultant, Ginsberg Cooper helps cancer centers meet NCI designation guidelines while allowing them to develop research programs, grow clinical trial activities, and improve core facilities and administrative infrastructure. This episode was recorded prior to the February 10th special report about President Trump's proposed cap on indirect costs. This episode of The Directors is sponsored by the American Society of Clinical Oncology. Now, enjoy the episode.
We are in the midst of a very challenging time in America, also a challenging time in oncology. So now in February 2025, as you chart the course for your institution, literally making decisions that have impact on thousands of people, what keeps you up at night?
John, I'll let you take that first.
Paul, just trying to ensure that we deliver, irregardless of what's going on, right? There's a mission, right? So, do we have everything that we need to serve our patients and the individuals within our catchment area? Do we have the resources, the infrastructure, the capacity, the engagement, involvement, and the voice of our community, right? Are we focused? And I guess, the overall environment is undergoing a seismic shift. So are our trainees prepared for what's coming? Will some of what we do continue status quo? Of course, probably, but there are major shifts afoot. Funding levels, what's fundable, things like indirects, right? There are a lot of things happening on a national stage that can impact and shift how we do business, but ultimately we do business. So there's just a lot of uncertainty right now, and any day or any hour during the day, right, something could change, right? But ultimately, right, we have to deliver. And so that's what keeps me up at night, ensuring that we have everything that we need to deliver for our patients and the people within our catchment area and cancer patients everywhere. That's what the expectation is for the City of Hope. And that's what I will continue to focus on.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Winn, are you sleeping well?
I wished. But I think that the biggest focus for us is doing better science to help more people, right? That's my focus. So what keeps me up at night? It turns out that certainly in the NIH budget, the NCI budget are things that we have to deal with and we have to navigate. It also turns out that we have to make sure that our, young investigators remain enthusiastic and that have the resources to allow them to continue to do the science that will impact not just today, but tomorrow. When you ask me what keeps me up at night, the one thing that keeps me up at night, believe it or not, is the issue around public trust. So as we are creating better science, which we are, as we are creating better technologies, and I hope that doesn't stop, because we've done over the last 50 years, we have not only impacted the health of the United States by reducing the burden of cancer by over 25% for everybody. But listen, we have impacted the global world. When you think of some of the most impactful discoveries that have happened, it's been out of the NCI and our academic medical centers in the United States. But what keeps me awake is the fact that we may, throughout all progress, be disconnected in a way in which we lose public trust. If we lose that public trust, that actually will also be an additional headwind that will prevent the science from doing what I want to do, which is to have better science that actually impacts more people. So, again, I wish I could talk only about the science, but it is about the science. John knows that. It's about everything from the basic science, fundamental sciences that drives the translation of that science into creating new molecules that become medicines. But at the end of the day, the reality is you can have the best medicines, but if you don't have public trust, you don't have everything. And that's what we're building here at Massey, to make sure that we make the science more transparent, make the science more accessible, and make the science more connected to the people we serve.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, how do you bring back the public trust? Not that I'm not really convinced that public trust is lost. It's lost among some folks, but not others.
I don't even know if it's about it being lost. Sorry for interrupting.
Yes.
I think for some groups it was never there in the first place. So, Rob, I'll let you continue to answer. That was just my point.
John, I think that was spot on. We were about to see that. In an era now with Dr. TikTok and Dr. Google, where you now have people that are challenging the science, I believe we do have more fragmentation of what the difference between 1950, 1960, 1970, when you came up with these drugs and there was this, we're putting a man on the moon, or we're coming up with the first chemotherapy that changes the life of, the cisplatin-based therapies for lung cancer. There was a sense, right, of momentum.
The role of a cancer center director is actually more roles than I can actually count. But one of them has to be, and I'm not sure it's been that way for whatever reason, is that of a public intellectual. And that's kind of why we are doing this. That's why we started the directors. But in that kind of vein, Joe Simone, who was a wise man whom you might describe as the Will Rogers of cancer centers, wrote this collection of maxims that I keep on my desk, and many others do as well. One of his maxims is leadership does matter. What is it like to be a leader of a cancer center right now? How are you communicating with your faculty, the staff, the patients who are surely worried? What do you say to them? Are there any anecdotes you want to bring in?
John, I'll let you.
Yeah. Again, you're right. I think, right now, leadership more than anything. I do agree with you that, we do have to be able to communicate, right, with the broad swath of individuals from all walks of life, because those are the individuals who we serve. And we have to be able to connect with everyone in an effective way, right? And so that is the job. And I won't even say it's challenging. I think it's more exciting. And I think as we look at the current environment, there's the old saying, never waste a good, challenging situation. Right. We just went through one in Southern California with the wildfires. Right. And it's interesting how you learn a lot about who you are. Right. When the system is stressed, and the system is being stressed right now, and you can either cut and run from it. Right. Or you can face it and learn from these challenges so that we'll be better in the future than we are today. So from my perspective as a cancer center director, that's what's so exciting. For me, there is a sea change afoot, right? And so there are those individuals who will be able to look across this change and find opportunities, right? Rather than dwelling on problems and challenges. So I think the role of a cancer center director is changing. And I think it will continue to change over the course of the next, let's say, 3 to 7 years. And those who learn from the mistakes, learn from the challenges, learn how to continue to be effective in impacting our communities, right, are the cancer center directors and the cancer centers themselves that will continue to advance and have incredible impact on not just our catchment areas, but the world as a whole.
Oh, absolutely.
I think John well said. I was going to add to that this cancer center leadership, I think, as John just mentioned, evolves over time. I think there was once upon a time where you looked at a cancer center director and what you saw was one flavor. It was somebody that maybe understood basic science and maybe kind of cared about translational. You now have cancer center directors that represent the most basic and basic. We now have cancer center directors who really, really understand, the data sciences and how we're going to use large language, systems for better science to actually do better care. But you also have people who are actually cancer control minded. In the early 70s, I would say most of the cancer center directors, probably most of them had a type. In 2025, as opposed to 1975, I think we're talking about a broader group of types of cancer center directors, which means I think there's a potential broader impact for America as a result of bringing people who are very much focused on cancer control issues, others who are focused on the bridging of the cancer control issues to the data and how that is driven by the fundamental sciences. I just think that as a group of these 72 cancer center directors, that we're coming probably at the best time for us in the context of the diversity of thinking, the diversity of thought, and also the diversity of just disciplines to better serve the NCI and the American public. So I'm excited about us.
Yeah, a lot of diverse input, and that tends to lead to innovation. And we are in a time, right, where we need to innovate.
But I guess my question is, how do you get the American people to understand the scientific method and to realize that it's actually important to them, as opposed to magical thinking or God knows what, political thinking?
So
I'll let you start, Rob, and I'll supplement.
I will say that I'll make this at home. So when I came in January of 2020 to be the cancer center director here at Massey, we had one goal. Let's try to become a comprehensive cancer center. I actually told them that wasn't my goal. The goal was to actually, number one, be able to have more people understand why the science matters. And as you talked about the science methodology, I'm going to reframe that and just so it says the benefit of scientific thinking and the impact it has on them. Part of this was related to our ability to engage our scientific and community and bridge that gap with our community. There is a science, believe it or not, of communicating. There is a science of engagement that is an emerging science that has been over the last 30, 40 years. And so we have taken seriously the art of bringing people into the cancer center, but also having folks go out from the cancer center to engage with various community members to, one, show that we don't just show up for one special fair and never show up again. There is a consistent almost sense that we're going to be there, and therefore it opens up minds and they listen. We've also had to go to the social media, become much more sophisticated at reaching people where they are. So the old days of just talking to people and not actually having social media be a real important backdrop to what you do is old ways of thinking. I don't know what cancer center these days doesn't have a social media sort of platform. And so, Paul, to address your question directly, I actually think that I now have people who would never have actually paid much attention to the cancer center as an example, come up to me and says, Dr. Winn, I've just told somebody about Massey. And I said, well, what did you tell him? I told him Massey's a different kind of cancer center because y'all care for everybody. In fact, no one had ever been in my little town of Bath, and all of a sudden you cancer guy showed up and then you took care of my aunt. So we make it feel as if it's actually also personal, the connectedness, right, to the community. We are now generating personalized data for each of these communities so that they know their cancer health, like almost a cancer report card. So working with the community that way and unpacking the science and letting them know that immunotherapy just didn't fall from the sky, that there were hardworking people that even when the lights weren't on and the cameras weren't shown, that were still doing the work, has now resulted in their aunt having a fighting chance of having an extended life.
Yeah, I totally agree. Especially that those last couple of sentences were salient. It's just sort of the process of making science, right, more understandable, period. And Hark also sort of reflecting back on some of the earlier comments about what the Cancer Center was back in the early to mid 70s versus what it is now, right? Back then, the communication was more insular, right? And it was within the Cancer Center and out to the scientific community. Now, right, the communication is more outward, right? As we think about the age of community outreach and engagement as a required component of the Comprehensive Cancer Center system and network, right? There's been a lot of work to help us develop best practices, right, on how we engage and involve the community, right? So, and then that bi-directional communication helps us both communicate better and helps us both understand, because it's not just the community understanding the scientific method, right? It's also us, right, understanding the needs of the community, and not just the community outreach and engagement specialists, but the scientists themselves. And I think we've made tons of progress. I still think we've got a long way to go to get there. But I think about new innovations with, AI, large language models, natural language processing, and the opportunities we have to innovate and use the information and these best practices to get even better, right, at that bi-directional communication. And I really do think that it's that bi-directional communication that's more important than just us teaching the community about the scientific method and the importance of the work we do. We need to understand the community's needs as well.
Well said. So to many of my colleagues, we would actually push the age-old adage, all about the science, baby. And it is true. But in an era where we have much more of a, I would say, populist society that ultimately is also wondering what it is that we're doing, we run the risk by not actually engaging the community of having the tag elite institution placed on it and therefore mistrust, distrust, or low trust. The one thing that we were brilliant at, and I'm going to say this to Bob Croyle back in the day, shout out to, the Henry C. Alinos and whomever else were involved with that, to the lecture Pascats, to the Bob Hyatts down. They said, you know what would make sense? Who are you serving? By having a community outreach and engagement, there are three pillars within that. One, defining the data of a catchment area. That is 85% or more of the people who you say, or globally who you serve. By then, you can now actually have a mechanism that says, do you know what value we actually have? Not only do we serve this area, but let me show you what we have done in result of screening, as a result of educating, and a result of getting more people from that area onto clinical trials. Because at the end of the day, we understand that our job is to serve you. Without an outreach and engagement component, who from our rural areas, just picking on them for a second, would actually give two hoots about the science that's being generated if it doesn't impact them? The outreach and engagement, by the way, should be one of the core components along with the science, not instead of, not above, but along with the emphasis on the fundamental sciences and translational sciences is the science of how then do we get the dissemination and the implementation of this stuff out in the community. And the science of engagement is the secret sauce of sort of saying, this is the value we have for you.
I totally agree. And I think the whole concept of variety is the spice of life. We have many cancer centers and we all serve many very, very different communities. And we can't all have one recipe and expect that we're going to be able to serve every community with that one recipe. So we have to have that engagement and interaction with the community to understand the needs. Dr. Winn talked about, the data, the catchment data. Who are the individuals? What is your population? Who are the individuals, right? Or the rural, the more urban, right? The various demographics. Who are the individuals? And how are various cancers impacting these different groups, right? The cancer burden, right? And without that knowledge, right, that community health assessment, right, you don't know what kind of research is going to truly impact that community. So we have to have COE. It has to continue to move forward.
Along with the DNA, it's that ZNA, man. That zip code neighborhood association is important. I'm just letting
absolutely. Every community is different.
Every community.
Plus, you do not set the catchment area. COE is determined by the catchment area, and you have absolutely no control over who is there. That was decided through migrations over time.
If I wound up being the Cancer Center Director of Utah, then I serve the population that I have in Utah. Right. And so what I love about the brilliance of the NCI and the brilliance of 20 some odd years ago of having a catchment area that a cancer center is responsible for and to be measured on and to be evaluated on is how well do you serve that catchment means that how does the science impact the community? And that is something that's different from the NCI designated cancer centers. That's different than any other program in the country.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. Otis Brawley, our friend, has data that basically shows, I don't have it in front of me, but there is a paper where he basically shows that the most underserved group in the United States is white.
So I will say to Otis that he is making a good point that sometimes we don't always make. When you think of a number of the volume of people, it's still the majority white in this country. But when you think of where most of the people are living, they're not always living in densely populated cities. When I think of, for example, a 70-year-old man from, for example, white male that lives in Beattyville, Kentucky, we know that their outcomes are 3 times worse when it comes to cancer than a 70-year-old white man that's living in Utah. Salt Lake City, Utah. Why? Because place and space matter. So he's correct. When we look at the health of white women or people, just poor people, right? Because it's not just being white, it's also what you have access to. That's why the ZNA matters, right? We are talking about people who don't have access always to the best insurances, or the best actual infrastructures for healthcare. Those are not just people of color. This is why when we talk about this issue around disparities, I'm going to use that word, disparities. Isn't just synonymous with African American. I don't even know why, right? When we talk about disparities with globally, we're looking at places like Beattyville, Kentucky. We're looking in places like Louisiana. We're looking in places like Arkansas and West Virginia, for example. And we understand that the burden of cancer in many of those communities, some of those communities predominantly white, are doing less well, right? We also want to not make the mistake that rural is only white.
That's right.
There has been an intersectionality of people, both Latino and African Americans, all across the country. So what I'm saying to you, Paul, is that I absolutely agree with Dr. Brawley that we need to look a broader swath and understand that the promise of 1971 was that we would eradicate a cancer by 1981. Now, that hadn't happened. But what we can do is it says this is an opportunity with AI, machine learning, and other innovative technologies around the scientific engagement of how do we push the science so that, again, better science to help more people. And that's our goal. And so you're right. We're as interested in Shenandoah as I am in the DC area, as far as.
From a purely volume perspective, he's right. But when you think about burden and you think about rates, right, by group, you can clearly see that the burden of certain cancers do track differently, right? So we have to keep both of those things in perspective. And I agree with Dr. Winn, right? When you think about rural communities, it's a very diverse, those are diverse geographies. We also have our federally designated lands, right? We have rural areas, the Mississippi Delta, which is my home. Right, which has a very large African American community, very rural, very underserved, and there are areas in the heartland of the country that are also very rural and very white. Right, the point is cancer does not discriminate. Right, everyone needs access to innovations to improve outcomes for cancer, and I think that that's the type of work that we all need to continue to do.
John, thank you for saying that. I love what you said. Cancer doesn't discriminate, and neither can your leaders of cancer centers. We take care of cancer. That's what we
take care of everyone.
Right. And it's interesting because both of you do lab research as well as public health interventions. What are the possibilities you see now going really from the markers for, say, prostate cancer up and on through public health measures. Where is the science now? How do you go do the work that both of you are famous for? What does it say to us?
John, I'll let you start.
Yeah.
I do need you to rephrase that question, Paul.
Please rephrase it for me.
Trying to understand.
Well, I'm thinking about your sort of landmark work on the markers for prostate cancer, for example.
Yes.
How do you go from there? As a cancer center director, you can go from there to actual population experiments.
Right. Got it. So, and it's a really great question, Paul, because I think it speaks to a couple of different things. I think you're getting at how do we advance that research to impact public health, right, through policy, right? But I think it also touches on something else that sort of reflects back on the previous conversation we had about Dr. Brawley's perspective, in that there's disease prevalence and what can we do to reduce the actual prevalence, right? The risk. How can we assess risk? Right. And then there's outcomes, which is the patient has already been diagnosed with cancer. Maybe it's advanced cancer. So how do we impact and try to improve their outcomes? I think sometimes we lump disparities into one bucket and say, oh, it's all socioeconomics. Well, sometimes socioeconomics may not be the key factor that's driving an increase in incidence. That could be genetic and biological. However, the outcomes, who can get access to the best medicines and the best surgical approaches, right? That could actually be access. So we have to keep both of those things in perspective. But circling back to your question, Paul, how do we move those things? Policy changes with evidence, right? So we need to collect the appropriate evidence and data to allow us to show, for instance, example of prostate cancer. We know that there are a series of genetic markers and risk factors, right, that are associated with an increased risk for prostate cancer. And over the course of, let's say, the last 10 to 12 years, a number of individuals have begun to refine that group of genetic variants to develop what we call the polygenic risk score, right? We're going to take a series of variants. We're going to measure those variants and see whether from an additive perspective, right, how many of those risk variants do you have, that genetic load of sorts? How does that associate with an increase in risk, right? And so there are a number of large studies that have been done, and importantly, they've been done in various cohorts, white cohorts, African American cohorts, Hispanic Latino cohorts, right, to understand what is the right collection of variants that's going to have a performance that's equal across all populations, right? And that's the work that's ongoing now. I think one of the things that has challenged some of this work are the sizes of the cohorts. And there was a time where there was a lot of funding going into the creation and building of cohorts. And over the course of the last, let's say, 15 years, the amount of funding for the development of those cohorts has retracted a bit. So I think we're coming back to that stage where prevention and early detection are beginning to take a bit of the lead, and I'm excited about it. And so hopefully we'll see the creation of larger, more diverse cohorts. We can collect the appropriate data, validate the findings, and have access to a really high performance polygenic risk score that will tell us what men are at risk for developing prostate cancer, one, and hopefully two, which men are at high risk of developing a more aggressive form of prostate cancer. And then we can not only just determine a man's likely predisposition of prostate cancer, but also how do we manage that individual over time, right? Do we take more of a watchful waiting approach, or do we take a more aggressive approach to treatment? So I think that that's where the field is sort of heading right now, Paul. We're trying to validate the polygenic risk scores and make sure that they perform across populations and that they can actually provide at least some level of information on likely disease trajectory.
And what I love about what you just said, John, is that this is my everyday excitement about being a cancer center director. And it is true. I love RNA binding, protein, and protein methylation. So, but we're going to leave that. But my role as a cancer center director is the following: to continue to add to the conversation and knowledge of fundamental science, to actually continue to add to the translational sciences. And Paul, you know, like us, the immunotherapy, the discoveries within that, the molecular targeted therapy, the advent of thinking about vaccines as new treatments, right, for cancer. It's exciting. But then you have the data. And I think John alluded to this earlier. Even when we're starting to think about the polygenic risk scores, we're actually talking about both genetic, genomic data, but we're also now talking about data from places like where you live. And the thing is, which is why we need the backbone of the AI and the large language model systems. And finally, when it comes to the public health stuff with the cancer control, again, the backbone of the data, the cohorts, the AI, the machine learning, we are at one of the most exciting times of science, which is why I hope everyone, and I mean this, everyone, no matter what persuasion they're from, understands that we have made an impact around the United States, reducing cancer and the world. There is much more to be gained because we have not just even gotten out of first gear yet with the scientists, with the data scientists, with some of the other things that we have, with the advent of even some of the basic sciences. We are not even close yet to getting out of first gear to that science will be able to have an impact on human beings and making the C word smaller.
And just one last comment, and I think that this also reflects back on our conversations about COE and importance as we create these, novel approaches for early detection, right? And these risk models, that we can communicate that effectively to our communities, because they can not only learn, right, but they can also be the advocates, right, that help push this to policy.
But here you are actually in a position to implement this as a public health measure, thanks to the Cancer Centers program, and very much thanks to the community outreach and engagement, which I'm losing sleep over because it just might be lost and swept out with whatever changes might be happening.
That would be a big, huge mistake, by the way.
A tragedy.
A tragedy.
A national tragedy.
I'll just be honest. If that happens, I would feel like I would have contributed to it and would be part to blame, because we have to fight for this. It's at the core of who we are supposed to be as a cancer center. And so I'm looking forward to standing shoulder to shoulder with Dr. Winn and the other cancer center directors to ensure that the engagement and involvement between the cancer centers and our communities has to be central to who we are and what we do.
And John, can I just add real quick that even if you're a basic science NCI designated cancer center, at the end of the day, we are all about applied sciences. So we need to look at the impact. The cancer center structure and the CCSG, about our impacts on policies, our impacts on our catchment area, give us a venue like nobody else to say, is your science interesting, but is your science impactful? We have the only structure within the whole entire NIH that I believe that really has over time shown that our research leads to impact. And so if we got rid of outreach and engagement, I think it would be almost like losing a major, foundational aspect of a cancer center. And I think it would make us vulnerable, particularly in the public's eye, in saying, well, what do you exist for if it's not for our benefit?
Yeah. We would lose our identity. It's becoming our identity. And we'd lose it.
Mm-hmm. Wow. It's interesting because when you kind of go back to what Vince DeVita said many, many years ago, is that every cancer center has 2 senators and, of course, a number of House members. So I would hope that you would be teaching the scientific method to some of the senators that probably could benefit from it. That's kind of what we're doing with this program too. But since we are staging thought experiments, can you imagine the world without NCI charting the course for cancer research? What does it look like if NCI is eviscerated, like a number of agencies are now being eviscerated?
So Paul, you just described one of the Hollywood movies like Terminator 2 or something, post-apocalyptic. I mean, come on, man. I mean, what we have right now, and it is true, over time, we do have better partnerships with industry. We certainly have better partnerships with, I think, the professional groups like ACS, which certainly actually does its role in AACR and ASCO. And we certainly have philanthropy and state dollars. But if the NIH were to, and again, I don't even, so we're talking about this theoretically because I don't think anyone
It's a thought experiment.
It's a thought experiment. It was
dystopian.
So, Aristotle sort of said you can entertain without accepting, right? That's the mark of a smart person, right? You can entertain without accepting. We don't have an NIH or we don't have an NCI. We would probably actually not look at all. We would be unrecognizable. The level of science, the quality of science, the quantity of science, the impact of the science would be eviscerated in a way in which you would not even be recognizable as an entity. So the thought experiment is what did we have it? I would actually say the NIH, the NCI, and the funding of it is a major source of oxygen and actually a major source of why we have actually reduced the big C to a smaller C because of the science that's been driven. If we were to lose that, you might as well sort of say it's like losing most of our limbs. Yet we'd exist, but we wouldn't be recognizable.
It's not a world I would want to live in. But I do think, right, that there's a seismic shift afoot. And it's an opportunity to rethink. And I think it was Dr. Winn who used the phrase, reimagine, right? What could it look like? And as we think about the next 5 years, the next 10 years, how we do science, how we make discoveries, how we develop drugs, how we engage with our communities, how we navigate our patients could be very different than it is now. So the Cancer Center Network has an opportunity to begin to refresh and rethink, right, an innovative path forward to what the NCI and what the National Cancer Center Network looks like.
Yes, sir.
Mm-hmm, but it's also a culture. I mean, the cancer centers, even though they're all very different, you've seen one, but it's really a culture where people work together towards a goal and hear what all of them are doing. So so it might survive. I don't know. It might survive. It might have an ability to survive even if NCI is gutted.
We would figure out a way, but it would be very different. We would figure out a way, but it certainly would not be where we are now. And it would take us a long time to probably even figure out how to get back to where we are now if we were cut it. So I hope that, that a post-apocalyptic dream that you just gave, I hope never materializes. I hope that's only the stuff of Hollywood.
So what do we see the first 50 years? I don't know, was it 25% decrease in mortality rates, right? And then,
races.
And then President Biden's challenge, right, to reduce by 50% in 25 years. That requires a little bit of a shift and a difference in how we do things. And I'm excited about that.
Me too.
Mm-hmm. Me too. Well, we just need a very strong NCI director who's able to express those dreams to the new administration, I guess.
That becomes a very critical position for us. I will say that we've had some really amazing people prior in that position who defended us incredibly well and articulated what we needed. Certainly at this point, having someone that understands the role of cancer centers, designated cancer centers in particular, is going to be obviously important for the success of all of us in the contributing, again, how the better science makes for better people and healthier people. So I hope whoever that is, and I'm almost certain whoever that is, they will understand the importance of the role of cancer centers and its research and its portfolio and its impact across the country.
Absolutely. It's crucial. Is there anything that I forgot to ask? Anything we didn't cover?
I was just going to say within this 50 years since 1971, I have been grateful for many of the leaders that have come before us, and particularly people like Harold P. Freeman and people like LaSalle Lafall and many
Lovell Jones,
and others who really, Otis Brawley, Lucilla
Sonia
Campbell, Springfield, John Ruffin. So there have been many.
Paulette Gray.
Absolutely.
Water
Lou
McCaskill,
Sullivan.
I mean, so
on the shoulders of giants.
Come on, man. So I think that what we hopefully represent is the future of how we've done well, but how we could do even better. And I'm so happy I'm able to share the spot with John and I, because whether you come from the cancer control perspective or the foundational science perspective, fundamental science and basic scientists, we all get to the same point. How do we actually have better science, wherever that comes from, to actually create healthier people to have more impact and better lives? That's all we're trying to do with all of our cancer centers.
Mm-hmm. Well, Dr. Carpten, anything else comes to mind?
I'm excited. There was a bit of trepidation at first, but I'm really excited because I think we're in an environment that's going to force change, and it's going to force us to shift, and that's going to force us to innovate. And I love innovation. And so I'm really excited about what's in front of us. And again, reflecting on Dr. Winn's comments about we didn't get here by ourselves. And Paul, I'd just like to thank you for recognizing the importance, and this being Black History Month, and having Dr. Winn and I have the opportunity to share this moment. And we know a lot of people are watching, and neither he nor I got here alone. There are a lot of individuals out there, but right now is the time for us to come together. If there was ever a moment to come together and ensure that the Cancer Center Network and the NCI remain strong and remain at the core of improving the lives of cancer patients here in the States and around the world.
And now we're joined by Ned Sharpless and Bev Ginsburg-Cooper. Is a former NCI director and a former acting FDA commissioner. He is now a professor of cancer policy and innovation at UNC Chapel Hill, where he had previously served as the center director. And Bev is a managing director for research at Huron Consulting Group. As a consultant, Bev helps cancer centers meet NCI designation guidelines and serve their communities. Now, thank you again for joining us. What are your thoughts about what you've just heard?
Oh, I mean, I really enjoyed that conversation from two old friends, Rob Winn and John Carpten. I have to say, one thing struck me right off the bat, and that's because of the moment we're living in with the present set of policies out of the White House that seem aimed in radically reshaping the NIH and the FDA. And it was this interchange they had between the two of them about rebuilding the scientific trust. I think what we're seeing is that there is a tremendous amount, if we've lost the trust or ever had it to begin with, I don't know, but there is this tremendous amount of skepticism right now about the NIH. And it's really on us, those of us interested in science and the NIH, to communicate effectively as to why the NIH and the NCI are such a good use of federal dollars and why they're so important. And I think that it's great to hear, and nobody can really do that better. Perhaps the most useful tool in the sort of group of people that talk to the public about cancer research or cancer center directors. I mean, it's a powerful thing the NCI has to have these charismatic, thoughtful leaders who can explain, why cancer research is so valuable and why it's been so useful and why it affects the lives in a specific community.
Well, it was great to hear two wonderful leaders who have really helped shape where cancer centers are today, and to, in many ways, define the new cancer leadership that will take us for the next several decades. It is a difficult time for all of our friends in the NCI community. And what I would say is we have to pull ourselves up from the bootstraps, recognize that the community that we serve wants something different from us or hasn't really understood all of that goes into cancer research that results in treatments that they may benefit from today, but took 20 years, like CAR T cells, et cetera, to actually come to fruition. So in many ways, if we think about community outreach and engagement, when I got into this field, that meant health fairs. And then we went into screenings, and we didn't really navigate the patient after the diagnosis to get the care that they needed. But today, when we think about COE, there's so much great work that's being done around the country in outreach, in COE leaders really connecting both with rural as well as urban underserved populations. But perhaps we have not done as well to be as data-driven or to do what I call in-reach, getting basic scientists and their trainees, translational scientists, and their teams out to the community to explain their work and the discoveries that took all of those years. And without NIH dollars, without the community support and donor dollars, these great treatments that are saving the lives of their family members, their friends, their community would not occur. There is nothing like the NCI Cancer Center community, in my experience, and look at all that we've done. So we just have to think about how to do things more smartly.
Mm-hmm. One other thing that resonated, I really like to hear the full-throated defense of COE. I thought that was good. There,
Yeah.
I'll tell you, I was in a sort of faculty meeting not long ago, as in like a week ago, where because of the new executive order around DEI, someone from a public health background had said maybe we can't study health disparities any longer either. And I was so depressed to hear, that's a completely misinterpretation of the scientific priorities. And I would say now is the time more than ever why we've got to explain why understanding what contributes to disparities in outcome within our catchment areas is a crucial question the NCI should be investing in. And, there perhaps were some excesses attributable to DEI, but that shouldn't reflect what we're doing scientifically. Health disparities, whether they're caused by race, ethnicity, SES, rurality, religion, geography, all of those things are appropriate scientific questions in an area where the NCI, it's sort of absurd to me, Paul, because like the NCI is required by law to produce a report on minority health and health disparities every year. So the idea that they're going to lose interest in health disparities is absurd. But I think it's just a sign of the times we're living in. People are overreacting and becoming risk averse.
We should probably distinguish DEI from COE, because COE is determined by your catchment area. You don't choose your catchment area except when you accept the job of director. And most of the underserved in the United States, according to some data, would be actually white. So in a way, it's a completely different subject. It's a three-letter abbreviation.
It is, and people have been sparked by words, but if you separate the words of DEI from the work that we're doing in COE, it's by the numbers. Where do you have a higher incidence, a higher cancer burden than with other groups? I work with a lot of cancer centers that have very high cancer disparities, but it's in rural areas, or their access issues, et cetera. So
Paul, I think my camera froze, so you couldn't see me nodding vigorously in assent to what you said. But that was, I think you actually said it better than I did. My point was they have nothing to do with each other.
That's right.
Other than their three-letter acronyms that confuse people. But cancer health disparities is an appropriate, important question that, of course, we should be studying. And to be put off by that because of some other, more of an HR topic than a scientific topic would be a real mistake. But unfortunately, it's one that I believe is being made consistently across the country right now. So the cancer centers can provide leadership here and say, look, this is something we should be doing. We will do.
Well, and cancer center directors really have so many roles, but one of them is to be a public intellectual, and that is why we started this podcast, this program. So I guess the other question is, can you imagine the world without NCI being at the lead of cancer research? This was kind of a thought experiment that I proposed that's kind of dystopian, but knowingly so. What happens?
I mean, this is, first of all, it's not as dystopian a thought experiment as you might think. I mean, members of Congress ask this question routinely, is like, do we need, a federal agency to support science? Is that really the best way to do it? And, Paul, you know the history of the NIH better than I do, but, it was a conscious government decision that perhaps, some are wondering, should we revisit? And I would argue that, the data suggests that the NIH and the NCI are a really good investment. That if you look at new therapies, new approaches to cancer, new prevention modalities, new diagnostics, that they all have a root in NIH-funded and NCI-funded science, and that the activities, the NCI and the NIH undertake to sort of help science develop are valuable and effective. I do think it's pretty clear that what NIH and NCI do most valuably is to fund, the really early basic science, the so-called curiosity-driven science that may not be as immediately translatable, and that there's a role for industry to then come in and partner with the NIH to move things into the commercial sphere. But, I think we've kind of figured this out. We have this framework of funding science and funding some basic and translational research through the government and academic sites, and then moving that into privatizing through commercial use as needed, and the system definitely works. And I think if the NIH were to go away and no one were to pick up that ball and fund very early stage science, then we'd miss it. And you can see this in other countries that don't have anything like the NIH, and they're asking themselves. And I advise these countries. I have advisory roles in Europe and Japan, and they ask, how can we have an innovation ecosystem like the United States? And I said, well, you need the NIH to fund $40 billion of research a year, and then it'll work. And so I think we would miss it if it were gone, and we'd miss it sooner than we thought, if to paraphrase Mitch McConnell there.
If you look at the economic return on investment of just your cancer centers, we've seen this time and time again. For every NIH dollar that a institution receives, there's at least $3 in economic return. And when you look at the economic impact analyses that centers like Kansas, UAB, Pittsburgh have all published, you're seeing billions of dollars of return to the economy of states across the country. When you look at the technology transfer impact of NIH dollars that then result in patents, licenses, and companies that are started in this country and beyond, the return just economically is really tremendous.
Now, what's the mood out there? What do you see?
Oh, Paul, we don't have time for that. The mood is scared. I would say there's tremendous fear about changes. There are these sort of announcements of potential draconian cuts in terms of personnel at the NIH and the FDA. There's, the uncertainty around indirect costs. There's, the talk from Congress about NIH restructuring. People are really scared. I encourage my colleagues not to overreact. I think some of this fear is self-driven and is, feeds on itself and unwise. I think, I'm surprised by how many people do not know the U.S. Constitution grants the executive branch some things, and the Congress has got the power of the purse, for example. So I encourage everyone to go read Article 1 and Article 2 if they haven't done that recently. But I think that, the mood is really scared. There's a lot of uncertainty. There's no doubt we're in for changes with RFK now being confirmed as the Secretary of HHS, and his noted skepticism for some aspects of what the NIH and the FDA have been doing. So, it's uncertain times. But I think the thing that has to be said is there's a lot of support for the NIH and other parts of HHS in Congress and the American public, and a lot of the value of what the NIH does is well known. And I think that if we can stick to the key message, which is the NIH is really important, it's valuable, and you miss it if it were gone, then I think that this is also an opportunity to improve some things that the NIH needs to do better.
I'll just add that when this all first hit, we went from shock to depression. I think we're going through the stages of grief. But what was really interesting to me was in talking to a number of cancer center directors this week, they're determined that we continue on. We put one foot in front of the other. We continue our great work. And what I really heard was, we're going to move on. We're going to adapt. We're going to adopt. We're going to innovate.
Absolutely. And I should probably disclose that we did that first part of the interview hours before the indirect cost announcement came out, and which is a blessing, because if we had been talking about that at that time, we would have been talking about indirect costs. Okay. And that would have really been a bad thing, because there's so much to talk about what the cancer centers are. Yes. And there you are. And by the way, everything we're talking about right now is going to be antiquated 6 hours from now, probably. Yeah, no doubt. So it's just uncertainty of the fast changes in world we live in.
When I became a cancer director at the University of North Carolina in 2014, and I remember I went to the first NCI. The NCI convenes a meeting of all the cancer center directors every year in Bethesda, or actually in Gaithersburg. And the first meeting I went to, I was welcomed to that fraternity of NIH directors, and at that time it was largely a fraternity, by Tom Lynch. And I remember, and I was the youngest cancer director by a considerable margin at the time, and I remember saying, kind of whispering to Tom under my breath, "It's a bunch of old white men." And Tom was like, "Yeah." and now, we see these two wonderful, charismatic, compelling leaders, John and Rob, who are African-American. There are a couple more, Selwyn Vickers and others. It's not novel anymore. There's so many great African-American leaders. It's almost unremarkable, which is remarkable in and of itself. While it's possible to dwell on the negative sometimes, in terms of diversity within leadership at the NCI, things have gotten a lot better in the last decade, and I think that's worth pointing out. And hopefully it will become truly unremarkable, because it will just happen now, as it appears to be doing. So it's great to see such wonderful leaders in such visible positions.
The leadership of cancer center directors is far more diverse than ever before, and yet the quality continues. And I think that is a reflection of the greatness of our country and the importance of continuing to have cancer centers that feel inclusive and welcoming to everyone, regardless of who they are and where they came from, and to help them be successful academically in their careers, in their pursuit of science, taking care of patients, serving the community. So we've come a long way, but I hope that we continue to reflect what is best in our society, which is diverse points of view, different experiences, but ensuring that we all uphold the greatest of ethics and quality standards, which I think your two preceding guests really reflect.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much for your wisdom, and also thanks to ASCA for sponsoring this program. Thank you again. Well, and thank you for tuning in to the directors.
Thank you for joining us on the Cancer Letter podcast, where we explore the stories shaping the future of oncology. For more in-depth reporting and analysis, visit us at cancerletter.com. With over 200 site license subscriptions, you may already have access through your workplace. If you found this episode valuable, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and share. Together, we'll keep the conversation going.
Until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and thank you for listening.